What if the flames that devoured the Library of Alexandria didn't destroy everything? What if the scrolls that burned were only decoys? Could the real truth have been sealed beneath the floor? Inscribed tablets from a forgotten time? Records of sky beings who taught early man how to build, heal, and rule? Was this ancient archive not just a treasure of Egypt, but a gateway to an even older world? The Anunnaki, often called gods, left no tombs, but did they leave scrolls? When Alexandria burned, the loss felt impossible to measure. But long before the last flames curled around the library's outer walls, the knowledge inside was already under threat. The Great Library wasn't only a place of books, it was a vault of memory, of rare texts, and hidden records collected from across the ancient world. Kings used it to cement power. Priests used it to preserve sacred knowledge. Scholars used it to ask dangerous questions. Among the tens of thousands of scrolls, there were whispers of locked rooms and sealed chests, sections forbidden to the public, overseen by a select few. Some believed these spaces held texts too old or too strange for wide eyes. When Caesar's fire struck the docks in the 1st century before the Common Era, it's said the flames jumped from grain store to manuscript vault, but only certain rooms were touched. Could someone have moved the most important scrolls before the fire? Could there have been a vault, below the main floors, where the rarest scrolls were sealed away, intact, untouched? The layout of the library included chambers without obvious purpose, stairs that led to capped doors, and side halls that remained off-record. A single chest placed under a flagged floor, lined with lime dust and rubble, could remain silent for 2,000 years. But what kind of scroll would warrant that level of protection? And who would risk their life to move it? Some ancient Egyptian scholars described a people who came before dynasties, whose knowledge of the stars and land cycles surpassed even temple priests. Later records in cuneiform spoke of the Anunnaki, beings of stature and strange light, who shaped the early world and left no graves behind. Could this be more than myth? Could one of the sealed chests in Alexandria have held a set of records describing the Anunnaki, not as gods, but as historical beings? And if so, who would have tried to erase them from the official record? The idea that scrolls survived the fire under the floorboards of the Great Library may sound romantic, but some believe the silence that followed was too perfect. The scribes vanished. The catalogs ended mid-line. Inventories that once named rare items simply stopped. If no one recorded their removal, could that have been the point? A vault sealed in haste, yet placed with care, would not need guards. It would need only time and dust. The quiet beneath the ashes may not be the end of the library's story. It may be where the most important part begins. If sealed chests of forbidden scrolls survived the flames, where would they lead us next? Travel with us into the heart of Alexandria's Museion, where knowledge was power and secrets were currency. Hit like and subscribe for more forgotten stories and bold investigations into the mysteries of our ancient world. Alexandria's Great Library did not stand alone. It was part of a much larger complex called the Museion, or Place of the Muses, where scholars lived, studied, and debated ideas drawn from every corner of the known world. Built under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, this center of learning was more than a storehouse of books. It was a working engine of knowledge, fueled by constant translation, transcription, and careful control. Texts were copied in long, quiet rooms by trained scribes, using ink, reed pens, and sharpened blades for corrections. Some scribes worked with Greek texts. Others handled older Egyptian, Babylonian, or Persian works. There were entire teams trained to recognize forgeries, replace damaged scrolls, and log metadata in complex catalogs. But not every scroll was available to every reader. The Ptolemies, like all rulers, understood the power of information. Access was managed through a tiered system. Junior scholars could read basic works on mathematics or medicine. Senior ones, trusted and trained, might study the private royal collections, which held rare texts seized from foreign ships or brought from distant temples. A special section, known to few, was said to house controversial scrolls, those that dealt with forbidden cosmologies, or ancient creation stories that did not match temple doctrine. Could these have included accounts of the Anunnaki, said to be gods from before the pharaohs? Could they have been hidden not because they were untrue, but because they were too difficult to explain? The architecture of the library allowed for secrets. Some rooms had no windows. Some staircases ended at blank walls. In the records, there are mentions of rooms that existed only on internal charts. Why were these places built, and who decided what they would hold? Some researchers now believe that these hidden rooms were used for more than just storage. They may have been used to prepare key scrolls for transfer during emergencies, or to protect the scrolls from fire and looters. If so, then the act of copying was not only about knowledge, but about defense. And if those copies were made with care, where were they sent? Many who worked at the Mausion were foreigners, invited by the king but loyal to their own traditions. Could they have smuggled texts back to their homelands? Could entire storylines have left Alexandria long before the library fell? What we know is that the library under the Ptolemies was not just a city of books. It was a fortress of knowledge, carefully watched, quietly defended, and deeply aware of the danger that powerful information could bring. It did not guard only facts. It guarded questions. Behind the public halls of the Library of Alexandria, far from the open shelves where students copied poems and medical notes, there existed private wings known only to a small group of elite scholars, priests, and royal advisors. These wings were not marked on any surviving plans, but ancient records describe restricted collections, some guarded by locks and others by silence. In these sealed rooms, scrolls, too sensitive for general study, were kept away from the eyes of common readers. Titles dealing with the nature of gods, the cycles of stars, and the origin of kingship were said to be stored in crates, marked only by symbols. Why would rulers of the ancient world ban certain writings, yet choose to keep them so close? What knowledge was so powerful that it could not be destroyed, but could not be allowed to spread either? Lists recovered from later Arabic texts mention categories of forbidden works once known in Alexandria, scrolls on lost continents, skyborne beings, and machines said to harness the energy of the earth. While most of these titles have never been seen again, clues about their contents remain in the comments of philosophers who were granted rare access. One described diagrams too complex for their time, another hinted at languages that predated known alphabets. These accounts often mention a reading room lit by a single flame, where the scrolls were unrolled only in the presence of a priest-librarian. At night, when the library's outer gates were shut, carts could be heard moving softly across the inner halls. Were these scrolls being rotated for preservation? Or were they being hidden in safer wings before a shift in power, or an incoming threat? One theory suggests that Ptolemaic priests acted in silence when political tides changed, removing scrolls deemed too dangerous for future rulers. Could they have moved them under cover of darkness to temple crypts or estate vaults along the river? And what would they have hidden first? Texts that challenged Egypt's gods, or those that told of ancient visitors from the stars? Documents from that era mention Books of the Watchers, a name also used for the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian records. If such scrolls were kept in these restricted wings, their movement would have been recorded nowhere. Only the silence of vanished shelves tells us they once stood there. As Alexandria's rulers changed, so did the rules of knowledge. and in a place built to hold the wisdom of the world, it seems the most valuable truths were those kept furthest from view. In the late summer of 48, before the Common Era, the city of Alexandria fell into sudden crisis as Roman general Julius Caesar, cornered by Egyptian forces, ordered the burning of ships docked in the harbor to block enemy access. But the flames did not stop at the water's edge. Carried by wind and smoke, the fire reached grain warehouses and neighboring buildings, structures that some ancient sources suggest were used as overflow storage for the Great Library. Eyewitness accounts mention the rapid spread and the panic that followed, not just from soldiers but from scholars and staff who feared for the safety of their life's work. Amid the chaos, a strange detail repeats across a handful of scattered letters and scroll fragments. They describe chests, wooden, sealed, and marked, being hauled out of affected buildings, not by looters, but by organized teams of librarians, scribes, and temple guards. Where did they take them? And under whose orders? Could there have been a protocol in place to protect the most valuable scrolls during an emergency? One Roman report noted that certain valuables were seen being loaded onto carts and taken toward the southern edge of the city, away from the fire line. Another text hints that the Serapeum, Alexandria's daughter library, had received sudden crates just days before the fire. Is it possible that staff predicted the threat and moved the most sensitive scrolls ahead of time? Or did trusted hands act without command, following unwritten codes of guardianship passed down within the scholar class? The nature of what was moved remains unclear, but one scribe's account claimed that among the rescued bundles were scrolls marked with stars, a cryptic phrase some researchers now connect to astronomical or possibly mythological texts, ones that may have touched on the Anunnaki and their supposed place in early human history. Why would such materials be prioritized during a fire when medicine, law, and geography scrolls were left behind? Was someone protecting knowledge that told of beings from before the flood, teachers from the sky, whose stories had long been buried under temple silence? The fire would later be blamed for the loss of over 40,000 works. Yet those numbers, debated and often exaggerated, do not tell us what was saved. What if the most controversial scrolls were not lost to the flames at all, but slipped into safe hands under the cover of crisis? In times of upheaval, orders and loyalty blur. Staff may have followed a different mission, not to defend the building, but to protect its silence. This event, viewed through the smoke of centuries, raises a new question. What if the library's greatest loss was not the scrolls that burned, but the truth hidden within those that vanished without a trace? Southwest of the Great Harbor, past the formal grounds of the city, stood the Serapeum of Alexandria, once a towering temple to the god Serapis, and home to the daughter library of the famed Mosion. Though often seen as a secondary site, this building held its own secrets, especially beneath its base. Ancient visitors described the upper halls as grand and open, filled with marble pillars and sacred altars. But it was the lower levels, the underground vaults, that drew the attention of modern archaeologists. These chambers were carved into the bedrock, with stone walls that bore signs of careful planning. Drainage channels hinted at long-term storage, and several areas showed evidence of once being sealed with stone caps and mortar, likely to protect contents from moisture. Could these lower rooms have served as a second layer of defense for Alexandria's most guarded scrolls? And if so, who decided which texts deserved that level of concealment? Some historians have proposed that scrolls too controversial for the main halls were relocated here, especially as political pressure grew against certain forms of knowledge. The materials stored may have included religious commentaries, unapproved star charts, and ancient origin texts linked to stories of pre-human teachers, what some later referred to as the Anunnaki. These scrolls, if real, would not have been left in public view. A chamber near the southern wing of the Serapeum once held a raised platform of stone, surrounded by walls of mixed limestone and brick. It lacked decoration and offered no signs of ritual use, suggesting a purpose more functional than ceremonial. Was this space used to house wooden crates, stacked carefully and marked only for those who knew what to look for? Later surveys using microgravity tools detected slight shifts under its floor, enough to suggest hollow sections below. Why would temple builders construct storage rooms so deep and then seal them with rubble if the contents were ordinary? During Roman rule, the Serapeum became a refuge for ideas no longer welcome in the city's heart. Priests and scribes retreated here with crates in tow, and stories passed through the centuries tell of locked doors and shadowed staircases that descended farther than any map recorded. Were these whispers only myths? Or did a quiet transfer truly take place? One that moved Alexandria's oldest scrolls away from fire, away from crowds, and into stone-lined silence. The deeper one looks into these lower rooms, the more the design speaks of control, caution, and intent. In a city built on knowledge, the Serapeum's basement may have been the last safe place for scrolls that told the wrong story at the wrong time. The strength of Alexandria's library did not rest in walls or scrolls alone, but in the trained scribes who moved quietly through its halls, copying, sealing, and preserving texts that kings and scholars deemed too rare to lose. These scribes worked under strict rules, many passed down from temple schools that trained them in multiple languages and forms of writing. Each scribe held a rank, and only the most trusted handled royal texts, especially those stored in the restricted sections or private archives. Their tools were simple but exacting. Reed pens sharpened to fine points, inks mixed from soot and rare minerals, and wax used not only for seals, but also for soft impressions that marked ownership or classification. A master scribe carried seals etched in stone or bronze, each tied to a roll, a room, or a ruler. With them, scrolls could be marked for temple use, court study, or absolute silence. When danger came close, it was these scribes who acted, not soldiers or priests. They knew which crates held medicine, which held maps, and which held the texts too dangerous to open without ritual. How many bundles could a single scribe seal in an hour, if given only one night to move the most guarded scrolls to safety? And how would they choose what to save first? Some scrolls may have held detailed accounts of sky charts predating Egypt's oldest temples. Others, as later texts suggest, told of ancient beings who taught mankind the arts of measurement, healing, and law. Beings the Mesopotamians called Anunnaki. These writings were never spoken of publicly, but scattered hints in the margins of safer texts suggest their presence. If such scrolls existed, their markings would have been known only to these scribes. One preserved wax fragment from a distant monastery bears a mark shaped like a star inside a square, matching none of the common classifications known today. Could this have been a silent code used to track knowledge considered forbidden? When sealed crates were prepared for quiet transfer, sometimes to temples, other times to desert estates, scribes packed scrolls in layers of linen, tied them with cords, and melted wax across the knot, pressing their seal into it without a word. These bundles were lifted not with ceremony, but with speed. They were placed into chest boxes, lined with resin or clay dust, to protect against dampness. By sunrise, the scrolls were gone, and only floor dust showed where they had rested. No record was kept. The scribe's seal, once broken, vanished with the crate. What was left behind often seemed ordinary: medical lists, harvest ledgers, poems of praise. But the true weight of knowledge lay in what was missing, and the few who noticed its absence said nothing. The scribes carried no titles of power, but they were the silent hands that chose what survived. In a world built on knowledge, Theirs was the last word before the page was sealed. The Library of Alexandria was said to house hundreds of thousands of scrolls, each carefully recorded in catalogs overseen by the head librarians. These records, once kept on wooden tablets coated with wax or carved into clay slips, listed scroll titles, authors, subjects, and shelf placements. Though the original catalogs are lost, later libraries and scholars preserved fragments of these listings, copied, translated, and handed down across regions. But when historians compared those fragments to the texts known to survive, they noticed something strange. Entire categories were missing. Whole groups of scrolls, once clearly listed under ancient sciences, pre-flood kings, or sky cycles, had vanished. Not one or two, but often 20 or 30 at a time. Why did these disappear in groups? Were they burned? Or were they removed by design? And if so, what connected them? Some scholars believe these vanished works shared a common thread. Stories and data tied to a deeper origin of mankind, older than what temple priests taught. In the margins of preserved Greek commentaries, we find mentions of scrolls of the first ones and calculations of starbringers. These cryptic phrases suggest that at least some lost texts dealt with ancient beings described as powerful, intelligent, and foreign, beings who taught early humans how to build, grow, and govern. Did these writings point to the Anunnaki, known in Mesopotamian accounts, but whispered of in other lands? And were those stories seen as too dangerous for a state library that served both religious and political power? It is no coincidence that many of these catalog gaps appear after periods of turmoil. The fire of Caesar's time, the changes in Ptolemaic leadership, and the growing Christian presence in Alexandria that later opposed older texts. One catalog, copied in the early Islamic period, references titles erased by decree from earlier scroll inventories. It doesn't name the scrolls, but it gives counts, dozens gone at once, always from specific shelves. Could these deletions be signs of quiet censorship, not destruction? When questioned, a later librarian wrote that some titles were moved where none should find them. What kind of knowledge required that level of silence? Some believe the answer lies in the missing star records and the ancient lists of rulers whose reigns spanned thousands of years, rulers whose names also appear in Babylonian king lists, and whose ages challenge what we consider possible. Are these scrolls truly lost, or were they hidden before each wave of change? If a vault beneath the Serapeum or a sealed room in a desert temple still holds these banned scrolls, then the catalog gaps are not just errors. They are the shadows of decisions made to protect or suppress something bigger than a name on a list. The silence in these records might be more telling than anything they once wrote down. Long before Alexandria's scrolls filled the halls of stone and cedar, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates had already recorded a tale that stretched deep into human memory. The Sumerians spoke of beings called the Anunnaki, powerful figures said to have come from the heavens, who shaped the order of earth and gave rule to mankind. These sky beings were not just gods in the way later empires imagined, but something closer to rulers, engineers, and judges. They were named Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, and others, with titles, domains, and deeds that followed a strict hierarchy. Some descended into the underworld, others mapped the heavens, and a few were said to have gifted humans with tools of knowledge, measurement, and law. Their stories appeared in tablets from cities like Nippur, Uruk, and Eridu, carved into wet clay and baked to endure time. But how did these Mesopotamian stories make their way west into the minds of Greek scholars and Egyptian priests? When trade routes crossed deserts and seas, they carried more than goods. ideas traveled too. By the time Alexandria rose, these tales had already passed through the minds of Phoenician scribes, Hebrew prophets, and early Persian thinkers. In Greek versions, names changed, but patterns remained. Sky beings became titans, culture bringers, or fallen stars. In Egypt, the story blurred with older gods, and temple walls recorded figures who came from beyond the stars to bring order after chaos. Why do these ancient sources all describe a time before memory, when visitors shaped the earth and vanished without a trace? Could these figures have been more than myth? And why were the similarities between cultures so rarely spoken of by later historians? Some scholars argue these stories were shared patterns of thought, shaped by fear and wonder. Others suggest something more: a common memory of real beings, whose presence was recorded, then hidden, as kingdoms rose and fell. An Egyptian priest named Manetho, writing in the 3rd century before the Common Era, compiled a list of kings that began not with men, but with divine rulers, whose reigns spanned thousands of years. These rulers match the pattern of the Anunnaki, and some of their symbols, spirals, wings, stars within discs, can still be found carved into stone blocks, scattered across ancient sites. Were these images remnants of an early contact? Or were they created by those who wished to honor lost teachers from a forgotten age? The scrolls of Alexandria, if they included the full versions of these stories, could have shown how much the Greek and Egyptian elite knew, and why they kept such stories locked in the quietest rooms. In a library meant to preserve the memory of the world, the tales of the Anunnaki may have rested not among the fables, but among the reports. And if they did, they were not filed under religion, they were placed under history. In Alexandria's golden age, scholars were not only collectors of scrolls, but builders of patterns. Some searched for links between the gods of different lands, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, and found striking similarities hidden beneath changes in language and symbol. These men, often trained in multiple tongues, kept quiet records of their findings, sometimes scribbled in the margins of translated texts. One such scholar, known only from a fragment, wrote that the figure Enki from Sumerian lore shared key traits with Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and writing. Both were linked to knowledge, water, and the guidance of early kings. Others traced the goddess Inanna to Hathor, and the storm god Ninurta to the Greek figure Ares. Were these matches coincidence, or were they drawing from a shared origin? Why were such comparisons rarely shared in public texts, and why did some names appear only in private commentaries or sealed copies? These were not casual guesses. Scholars who made them used tools of precision, cross-referencing rituals, planetary calendars, and flood myths to reveal a deeper thread. Some even created glossaries, pairing foreign gods with their supposed local twins, but few of these lists survived. Those that did often stopped short of full conclusions, as if the writers feared crossing a boundary. One preserved papyrus from a scholar named Xenophus of Heliopolis contains a strange note. The gods of the East are the same, but their masks are many. What did he mean by masks? Was he suggesting that stories of the gods were crafted disguises for beings who once walked openly among men? And if the Anunnaki were the source of these gods, why did later scholars turn their faces away? The priests of Egypt controlled access to temple archives, and Ptolemaic rulers often censored works that challenged the state's divine image. A scroll linking multiple pantheons might have been seen not as a breakthrough, but as a threat. Those who made such links may have been ordered to keep them hidden, or worse, to erase them. Still, pieces remain. A Babylonian tablet sent to Alexandria by trade bears markings that match an inscription on an Egyptian stela found centuries later. Both show a figure standing within a ring of stars, holding a rod and coiled cord, tools of measurement. Could this figure have been a memory of the same teacher, dressed in different names across time? Scholars who saw the connections walked a fine line. Their notes suggest awe, curiosity, and caution. If they believed the gods of all cultures were echoes of a single ancient presence, then what they found in the scrolls of Alexandria might not have been myth at all. It might have been history, too old and too disruptive to speak aloud. In the quiet corners of the library, under soft light and thicker stone, some of these patterns were drawn, but not published. Their meanings, like the names they carried, were meant only for those who knew how to read between the lines. Among the thousands of scrolls and documents once stored in Alexandria were charts that traced the coasts, rivers, and harbors of the known world. Many were copied from older sources: Phoenician, Egyptian, and even Babylonian, carried by merchants, scholars, and sailors into the halls of the great library. The port books listed cargoes, tolls, and routes, but some maps carried stranger details: coastal outlines drawn with curves that no longer match today's shorelines. Markers shaped like spirals, suns, or winged discs appeared in places where no temple stood and where few people lived. Why did these early maps include such symbols, and who first drew them? Some of the oldest sea charts referenced lands now lost beneath water, coastal plains, wide estuaries, and inland harbors that have since vanished. These markers weren't random. In several cases, symbols matched those found on temple walls, or in old myths describing gates of the gods or places of descent. One map, believed to be copied from an earlier Babylonian version, placed such a symbol off the western coast of Africa, near a chain of islands known today as the Canaries. Another bore a similar mark at the mouth of the Nile, near the delta's edge, where shifting sands and tides may have covered old ruins. Could these points represent places once visited or built by sky beings remembered as the Anunnaki? And were these maps quietly preserved in Alexandria because they held more than trade value? Some records describe early scholars comparing these charts to flood legends, matching disappearing coastlines with stories of cataclysm. What began as navigation became something else: a quiet search for traces of an earlier age. The maps were stored not just for sailors, but for those who studied the memory of the world. In the margins of one Greek copy, a note written in small hand asks, "Who measured this, when no mast had touched these waters?" The question suggests the chart predated known sea travel. Could such a map have been handed down from civilizations touched by visitors from beyond? If the Anunnaki once walked the earth, their sites may have left marks, not just in stone, but in the geography recorded by those who followed. Later chart makers may have copied what they didn't fully understand, preserving lines and points that no longer fit the changing world. And Alexandria, as the keeper of the old, held them quietly, waiting for someone to ask what lay beneath the symbols. In a world where coastlines shifted and names were rewritten, these maps offered a rare kind of truth, a memory drawn in ink, passed across ages, and filed in silence beneath the weight of stone. Not every scroll lost from Alexandria vanished without a trace. Some found new life in distant cities, carried in silence by hands that valued knowledge over borders. One such trail begins with a listing in a damaged inventory, an unnamed scroll marked only by its shelf symbol, and the note, "Transferred east." The trail picks up again in Antioch, a bustling center of trade and scholarship, where Greek scribes once gathered rare texts sent from Egypt. Among their holdings was a scroll said to detail the descent of first teachers and their instructions to early kings. That copy, too, would disappear in time, but not before fragments of its wording surfaced in Syriac, spoken and written centuries later in Edessa, near the eastern frontier of the Roman world. How did the ideas move so far, and who ensured their survival? Hidden in the footnotes of a Syriac chronicle is a passage that mirrors parts of Sumerian texts, describing luminous figures descending in pairs, offering law, calendar, and craft. The wording is not identical, but the themes match: a teaching race, gifts of knowledge, a promise broken. Could the scroll from Alexandria have been the source, or one of many preserving a deeper truth? And why would such a text be translated into Syriac, a language of monks and scholars living far from Egypt's temples? Some believe that early Christian thinkers, many trained in Alexandria's schools, quietly copied portions of banned scrolls before they were lost to fire or politics. These copies, often disguised as allegories or parables, slipped past censors and made their way into border cities, where curiosity remained free. The version found in Edessa contains peculiar phrasing, phrases that appear in no other Syriac works, but match idioms from older Babylonian writing. Who taught the scribe to write that way? Could the teacher have been someone trained in Alexandria's restricted wings? And if so, what else did they pass on, hidden within the quiet folds of translation? Later copies omit names, but preserve structure. 7 bringers, laws of measure, warnings of flood, and a golden age, cut short. These echoes, softened by time, still carry the rhythm of a voice no longer spoken. The original scroll, if it truly left Alexandria, may be gone, but its shadow remains in the copies made by scribes who understood its value. Like a candle lit from another flame, its light moved eastward, dimmed but not lost. In monasteries and old libraries where few look, some of those copies may still sit, misfiled, mislabeled, mistaken for simple myth. But those who read closely, who trace phrases back through language and time, may yet find the fingerprints of a scroll once sealed beneath the stones of a burning city. Within the inner workings of the Library of Alexandria, power was not held by scribes alone. It was shared with guards, temple priests, and high librarians, each bound by codes of duty that reached beyond scholarship. Surviving fragments from Ptolemaic and early Roman rule hint at formal oaths taken by those entrusted with royal knowledge. These oaths were not mere promises to safeguard scrolls from theft or fire. They carried deeper weight. Some were sworn in the presence of gods, overseen by temple elders, and included words meant to bind the soul to secrecy. One oath, translated from Demotic script, reads, "I shall not speak the contents. I shall not name the vault. I shall guard what the eye must forget." What vault did they mean? And what scrolls required an oath that extended beyond life into judgment? In later Greek copies, we find regulations for the stewards of the hidden works, who were required to memorize symbols rather than write them. This suggests a class of keepers whose role was not just preservation, but concealment. Could such an oath have covered a chamber buried beneath a floor, or a chest sealed under temple stone? And if so, who gave the command? The Ptolemies, though foreign rulers, followed Egyptian tradition in treating knowledge as a sacred force. Certain writings, especially those touching on divine origins, cosmic order, or beings from the stars, were considered too potent for public view. These were locked away, and access required more than rank. It required trust proven by oath. One record lists a group of 8 men given access to a sealed chamber for one night only. What they carried out, or left behind, was never written. Could this have been a ritual to secure a vault, now lost to time? Was the oath itself designed to protect knowledge tied to the Anunnaki, those sky beings described in old Mesopotamian tales, whose presence challenged the temple's gods? If so, then the silence of the keepers was not just loyalty. It was law. In later centuries, priests who broke such oaths were said to suffer dishonor beyond the grave. Their names were removed from ledgers, their families barred from temple service. Fear may have played as strong a role as faith in preserving what lay hidden. And yet, some whispered. We find brief mentions in the side notes of desert monastic texts, speaking of guardians of the scroll beneath the cold room, and the vault no wind reached. These lines, vague and scattered, could be nothing, or they could be remnants of a tradition that held firm for centuries. A tradition that placed scrolls beyond reach, and truth beneath silence. In a library built to hold the world's wisdom, not everything was meant to be read. Some truths were sealed, guarded by men whose loyalty outlived the walls they once walked, and whose oaths may still echo in chambers no foot has touched since flame met stone. The architecture of Alexandria was not only built to impress above ground, but to endure in silence below. The Ptolemies, keen to blend Egyptian and Greek engineering, often commissioned buildings with dual purposes, temples that housed gods, and floors that hid memory. In many surviving plans and ruins from this period, we find the same quiet feature: flagged floors laid over hollow voids. These voids were not accidental. Builders used fill layers made of crushed stone, broken brick, and packed clay to disguise cavities left beneath surface tiles. These chambers, often small and featureless, were placed beneath storerooms, side rooms, or ritual halls. Why create such spaces, if not for storage? And what, in a city of scrolls, would be sealed so carefully beneath a place of worship or study? In one excavated site outside ancient Alexandria's limits, a vaulted subfloor was uncovered beneath a now ruined estate. It held nothing inside, only traces of disturbed fill and fragments of broken seal wax pressed into old dust. Could it have once stored crates removed in secrecy? Across several temples linked to the Serapeum, archaeologists have recorded anomalies in the floor structure, areas where the tile patterns shift slightly, and where the sound underfoot becomes dull. Ground surveys suggest voids no more than 2 cubits high, just enough to hold a chest or two, placed side by side. These aren't tombs or ritual chambers. They were too shallow, too plain, too intentional. Could these have been the final hiding places for Alexandria's forbidden scrolls, packed by scribes, sealed by wax, and placed under stone before the fires came? The method is known in older Egyptian architecture. Builders often left small chambers beneath sacred thresholds to hold objects of importance, amulets, texts, even miniature shrines. Ptolemaic masons continued the practice but used more practical materials, shaping cavities that resisted moisture and concealed their purpose. No outer markings signaled what lay beneath. Only those with access to construction plans or memory could find them again. One Greek engineer wrote of rooms that do not open, for they were never meant to. And what orders gave the command to seal knowledge away? In times of upheaval, knowing a scroll existed could be dangerous. Better, perhaps, to deny its presence entirely. A small chamber beneath an unused storeroom required no guard, no key, just silence. In the chaos that followed Alexandria's many fires and sackings, such voids were forgotten, their contents left behind as the world changed above. If we could map every flagstone that rests atop older fill, every floor that gives a hollow tone, we might find more than broken brick. We might find the lost crates of scribes, placed not in panic, but with precision, hidden beneath the very stones, meant to preserve knowledge for the ages. By the end of the 4th century of our era, Alexandria had changed. Rome held the city, but its old gods were fading fast. Christianity, once banned, now ruled the temples it once feared. In the year 391, the Serapeum, the towering sanctuary of Serapis and keeper of the daughter library, fell to a violent tide. Driven by orders from the imperial court, and growing hostility from the Christian population. Crowds entered the temple grounds. Statues were smashed. Altars were stripped. The great halls were emptied of their sacred images. But in the chaos of this sanctioned destruction, something else was taken, quietly, and long before the final crowd arrived. Witnesses from the time wrote that the rooms had already been cleared, that nothing of value remained when the columns fell. Who removed the scrolls, and under whose protection did they vanish? Some believe temple priests, long aware of the rising threat, acted weeks or even months before the order to destroy came down. They had time, knowledge, and access to private routes through side chambers and service halls. Could they have used these passages to remove sealed crates, bundles of scrolls, relics, and records meant never to be seen again? The Roman writer Eunapius, a defender of the old ways, wrote bitterly of scrolls hidden before the fire, so that no hand would desecrate them. His words hint at intent, not accident, not panic, but preparation. Were these scrolls the final remnants of the older library collections, now stored in the Serapeum's deeper vaults? And did they include texts tied to forbidden histories, accounts of sky beings, pre-flood cities, or ancient laws passed down by watchers? If so, the priests may have risked their lives to move them. Unlike the earlier loss of Alexandria's main library, this was not a fire driven by war. It was a targeted cleansing, one that followed legal orders. The temple's stone foundations cracked under the boots of zealots, but the silence of the lower rooms had already spoken. Sealed crates, once tucked beneath floor chambers or behind stone panels, may have been lifted out under cover of night. Where they went remains unknown. Some say they moved inland, to desert sanctuaries. Others believe they were carried east, into hidden monasteries untouched by the new faith. If even a few scrolls survived that purge, then the Anunnaki stories, once copied and sealed in Alexandria, may have found life in faraway lands. The destruction of the Serapeum was loud and final. Its statues lay in pieces, its columns burned. But what matters most is what was not found in the rubble. The rooms were too clean, the shelves too bare. In a city that had already lost too much, this second wave of silence may have been carefully arranged, leaving behind only dust and the question, who saved the last scroll, and what truth did it carry away? In the final years of the 4th century, long after Alexandria's golden age had dimmed, one figure stood at the crossroads of science, memory, and power. Hypatia, the daughter of mathematician Theon, and perhaps the last true guardian of ancient reason. She taught in the old way, drawing students from across the empire to her circle. In her home, not far from the ruins of the Serapeum, discussions of geometry, astronomy, and philosophy continued, even as temple fires cooled and scrolls disappeared. Hypatia and her circle worked with older texts, manuscripts copied long before their time, many from the Alexandrian collection. She wrote commentaries on Ptolemy's astronomical works and edited mathematical treatises that had passed through generations of scholars. But there are hints that her studies extended deeper, into writings not openly acknowledged. Some letters between her students speak of diagrams not taught in the schools, and of coded language used to protect the origins of certain teachings. What texts did Hypatia's circle protect? Could she have inherited works once sealed in the library's restricted wings? Scrolls describing ancient visitors, cycles of stars, or technologies now lost? The answers may lie in how carefully her students guarded her legacy. After her death, brutal, politically driven, and symbolic of a changing world, none of her own writings survived. Not one scroll bearing her hand remains, but traces appear in the works of her pupils and followers, who fled to distant lands. Some of them carried texts, copied under pressure, hidden in crates marked as trade goods. Later fragments, found in desert monasteries, include references to the star tables of the teacher and lessons drawn from the speech of the watchers. Were these the voices of the Anunnaki, preserved quietly within astronomical allegory? And did Hypatia believe those stories carried truth hidden in metaphor? Among her teachings were precise instructions for celestial calculations. Yet some lines don't match known Greek sources. They hint at models older than Hellenistic science, models seen only in Mesopotamian tables carved thousands of years before. How did she learn them? Who passed them on? It's possible that within her circle were custodians of knowledge that once moved through the floors of Alexandria's great halls, carried in silence by priests, preserved by scribes, and finally entrusted to minds that would protect without name or monument. If any scrolls from her circle survived the fires and blades, they may rest now not in grand libraries, but in simple clay jars, hidden behind monastery walls, waiting for hands that still know how to read the stars like she once did. Hypatia's death was loud, but the scrolls she touched may still whisper. When Arabic scholars entered Egypt after the rise of Islam in the 7th century, they encountered a land rich with broken stones, faded temples, and scattered texts, remnants of a world long past. Alexandria, though no longer the crown of learning it had once been, still held echoes of its old voice. Some scrolls had survived in private hands, others in monastic vaults. From these, early Arabic scholars began translating Greek works into their own language, preserving knowledge that may have otherwise vanished. Philosophers like Al-Kindi and later Al-Farabi referenced Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen, names deeply tied to the Alexandrian tradition. But within these translations, a curious pattern appears. Certain subjects are fully explored: medicine, logic, astronomy. Others, especially those dealing with origins, star beings, or advanced knowledge from unknown sources, are only hinted at. Why were these topics treated with caution? And what parts of the scrolls were left untranslated or marked for restricted use? In the Kitab al-Firist, a 10th century catalogue of books, we find mentions of texts with titles like The Teachings of the Ancients Before the Deluge and Chronicles of the Star-Knowers. Yet the works themselves are either lost or represented only by vague summaries. Could these have been fragments of scrolls once held in Alexandria, carried east by those who feared their loss? Some Arabic commentaries speak of first men who were taught by lights in the sky, descriptions oddly close to the Sumerian Anunnaki accounts. But unlike other myths, these are not retold in detail. Instead, they're buried in footnotes or passed off as metaphor. Why would scholars who translated massive volumes on logic and astronomy avoid these stories? Was it fear of backlash? Or did they view these accounts as sacred, something to be preserved but not shared? In one translated commentary on Hermetic philosophy, the translator adds a personal note. The knowledge here is not for public use, and its full words are not written. What words did he withhold, and why? Some believe that older scrolls, once copied in Alexandria and carried east, were kept in circles of scholar priests who valued discretion. These texts may have preserved records of early teachers, skyborn, wise, and powerful, whose influence stretched across borders and eras. To name them openly would be to challenge the accepted order of things. So the stories were protected in silence, shielded in allegory, and passed on only to those trusted to read between the lines. The Arabic scholars built a bridge to the ancient world, but not every stone was shown. What they saw through the windows of Alexandria's fading halls may have been far stranger than the histories they chose to write. The question remains: what truths did they leave just out of reach? sealed not by stone, but by deliberate omission. In the quiet stillness of desert monasteries scattered across Egypt, a different kind of library endured. Hidden behind sandstone walls and beneath faded crosses were collections of parchment and papyrus, written in Coptic, the final evolution of the ancient Egyptian tongue. These places had become sanctuaries of learning after the fall of Alexandria, where monks kept the remnants of scrolls that once passed through its great halls. As scholars searched through these dusty vaults, they uncovered strange loan notes, brief records in Coptic that referenced texts no longer present. One note read, "From the teachings of the Watchers, scroll sent for translation to the brothers beyond the valley." Who were the Watchers? And why were these texts never returned? Even more intriguing were the short summaries of older tales, condensed accounts written in plain Coptic that spoke of beings from the stars, cities of glass, and tools that spoke with light. These versions were stripped down, almost too simple, like they had been copied under pressure or meant only as memory aids. But where were the full versions? Had they once sat on the wooden shelves of Alexandria? Many believe they had. Monks often acted as silent bridges between the old world and the rising faith of Christianity. Some were scribes, fluent in Greek, Hebrew, and Coptic, able to copy and condense what others could not read. Was it possible they saved scrolls no longer safe in public view, rewording them just enough to keep their secrets alive? One preserved text spoke of those who made man from red earth and who brought fire from the dark sky. The phrasing echoed Sumerian tales of the Anunnaki, but it was cloaked in Christian metaphor. Could this be intentional? Were these ancient records rewritten as parables to protect their origin? In the monastery of St. Macarius, a manuscript referred to the Scroll of Origins, once housed in the Temple of Knowledge by the sea. Did this refer to the Library of Alexandria? And if so, had a monk once carried it across the sands for safekeeping? The trail grows colder the further one goes, but these fragments still speak. They tell us that not all knowledge was destroyed in fire. Some of it was whispered into new languages, disguised within religious stories, or hidden beneath monastery stones. What if the Anunnaki's story was not lost but merely rewritten? How many Coptic manuscripts, quietly sitting in remote libraries, still hold pieces of the truth? As more of these texts are digitized and translated today, their cryptic phrases might yet unlock doorways to histories long denied. In the silence of Coptic ink and aged parchment, the voice of Alexandria may still whisper, and perhaps it speaks of sky beings once honored, then hidden. In the libraries and storerooms of ancient Alexandria, one might expect to find smooth rolls of papyrus inked with Greek or Egyptian script. But what surprises many scholars is the evidence that some chests, sealed and locked away, may have also held something older: tablets made of hardened clay, etched in wedge-like cuneiform. These two materials, papyrus and clay, stood at the crossroads of two worlds, one modern for its time, the other ancient beyond reckoning. How could they exist side by side? And more importantly, who knew how to read both? The Ptolemaic dynasty, though Greek in origin, ruled over a culturally layered Egypt, and their court often welcomed scribes from Babylon and Assyria. Some of these scribes were trained to read the fading language of the stars, Sumerian and Akkadian, preserved in the deep strokes of cuneiform. Papyrus was light, easy to store, but fragile with age. Clay, though heavier, survived fire, water, and time. Was it possible that key stories of the Anunnaki, once pressed into clay in the ancient cities of Ur and Nippur, had been quietly transported westward and sealed in vaults beneath the Library of Alexandria? One tablet found in Memphis held a hymn identical to those discovered in Nineveh, hinting at such movement. Scrolls and tablets could indeed sit side by side, packed carefully in wooden crates, lined with straw or cloth. A single chest might contain knowledge written 3,000 years apart. But who had the eyes to read both? Among the staff of Alexandria's libraries were multilingual scribes, some trained in Aramaic, Syriac, and even older tongues. Foreign experts arrived often, seeking access to rare works. Did these scholars secretly transcribe cuneiform texts onto papyrus, blending Sumerian thought into Greek frames? Or did they keep them locked away, unread, too sacred or dangerous to share? One preserved letter from a visiting scholar mentions a stone-written tongue older than Egypt's sky temples, but gives no further detail. Could this refer to cuneiform? The deeper question becomes, why store clay tablets at all, unless their contents were worth preserving? Some theorists believe they held not myths, but instructions, blueprints, or even warnings left by the Anunnaki. Were such records carried in crates from fallen Mesopotamian libraries and delivered to Alexandria for safekeeping? If so, why did they vanish from history after the fires? Did a few survive, hidden in desert vaults, mistaken for bricks or debris? We often think of Alexandria as a Greek-Egyptian center, but its collectors reached wide, and their ambitions stretched back into older worlds. In that space between ink and clay, between reed pen and stylus, might we find the missing key? What if the oldest tales of sky beings were never copied into new forms at all, but remain today, forgotten in ancient crates beneath forgotten stones? Long before modern telescopes, kings across Egypt and Mesopotamia relied on star charts and flood tables to guide decisions. These ancient rulers knew the heavens were more than decoration. They were maps, clocks, and warnings. In Alexandria's halls, where scrolls gathered from every known land, records of such sky lore were considered priceless. Some charts predicted the Nile's rising, others followed the movement of Venus or Jupiter, and some included eclipses that frightened entire cities. But where did the oldest of these come from? Several charts found in Thebes and Babylon shared strange, precise alignments, too accurate for the tools of their time. One theory suggests they may have come from records carried by the Anunnaki, sky beings whose arrival stories filled early Sumerian texts. Could kings have treasured charts not made by man, but left by otherworldly visitors? A few scrolls described star maps burned onto thin plates of gold, later translated into simpler versions for royal use. The accuracy of such ancient data puzzled modern researchers. Why did some rulers invest so much in preserving sky lore, even during war or famine? In the Ptolemaic court, it was common to assign astronomers official posts, often near the king. Their job: predict floods, advise on temple rites, and track omens in the stars. Some of these experts also had access to locked chambers beneath libraries. Might they have seen older charts too powerful or strange to share? A papyrus fragment found in Hermopolis mentioned gates in the sky known only to watchers, along with a diagram that didn't match known constellations. Was this simply symbolic, or based on earlier, lost astronomy? Even more curious, one sealed letter between royal advisors spoke of a metal plate with holes that marked a path across the lion's mouth, possibly referencing Leo. But this wasn't how Egyptian priests normally described the stars. Did they borrow language from Sumerian priests who served under Anunnaki rule? The farther back we look, the more we find kings, not just observing stars, but copying sky charts that were already old in their time. If these charts were handed down from earlier beings, wouldn't a king guard them with his life? Why then do so few survive? Were they hidden, destroyed, or simply misunderstood? And if such star maps contained more than just calendars, perhaps warnings or routes, did some kings use them for secret journeys or sacred tasks? The deeper question is this: did ancient rulers rule only on Earth, or were they also trying to rule time itself by owning the oldest maps of the sky? In Alexandria's royal wings, behind thick doors and guarded vaults, might these records still rest, waiting for the right eyes to open them again? As the ruins of Alexandria slowly gave up their secrets, modern tools offered new hope for what lay beneath. In quiet surveys of the ancient library's footprint, scientists brought instruments never imagined by Ptolemaic scribes. Ground-penetrating radar swept across tiled floors, sending pulses deep below the surface. Microgravimetry, sensitive to even the smallest density changes, searched for voids hidden in stone. Together, these methods could reveal empty chambers, spaces where no Earth should be. One sweep found a narrow anomaly beneath a forgotten wing of the Serapeum. Another scan traced a rounded chamber beneath a section once used for scroll storage. These weren't catacombs or burial tunnels. The shapes were too regular, too intentional. Could they be hiding places for scrolls packed away during crisis? Theories grew. If crates of papyrus or clay tablets were hidden before the fires, their wooden boxes might be long gone. But the rooms holding them might still be there. And if sealed chambers were truly untouched for over 1,000 years, what lay inside them? Before digging, teams planned soft approaches. A gentle core sample here, a shallow bore there. No destruction, only precision. The idea was simple: find the edges, confirm the voids, then plan how to open safely. One radar echo seemed to match the size of a storage chest, down to the curvature of its lid. But what if it was simply a natural hole or a drain? Caution ruled every step. The goal wasn't treasure, but truth. What if the true records of Alexandria, lost works, secret histories, forbidden texts, were right beneath scholars' feet all this time? Could the oaths taken by keepers and builders have hidden something this well? In some surveys, the instruments picked up faint linear shapes, parallel and even, like shelves or containers. One reading suggested a stair led downward, now blocked by fillstone. Who blocked it? And when? And why so carefully? Were these early attempts to protect a hidden vault during a siege? Or signs of royal orders carried out in silence? Might Anunnaki texts, star charts, or early flood records still rest in silence, wrapped in resin cloth or sealed in metal? The idea no longer seemed far-fetched. For centuries, theories were just words. Now, there were signals in stone, echoes in dust, shapes that didn't belong unless someone long ago made them. Could a rediscovery be close? Would a new scroll, one never copied or quoted in any Arabic or Greek work, finally emerge? Or would the vault remain closed forever, a whisper beneath our feet, hinting at a truth too vast for paper alone? The tools were ready. The paths were mapped. And under the ground, the past waited in stillness, wrapped in silence and stone. In the oldest wings of Alexandria's ruins, time had worn the marble thin. Some rooms were sealed, others reused over the centuries. But a few corners held signs no ordinary visitor would see. Beneath faded columns and fractured steps, cellars stretched into the earth, lined with stones that didn't quite match. Some were granite, others limestone, and many bore tool marks far older than the Ptolemaic period. Walking the floor slowly, trained ears caught changes in sound. A light tap with a wooden cane or bone tool echoed differently from one stone to the next. Hollow tones under certain slabs hinted at cavities. Not large, but large enough to hold a man, a box, Or perhaps a sealed scroll chest. The walls told their own story. Smooth mortar met rough joints in strange places. In one room, a single corner had mortar that seemed newer, still dry, slightly looser, and brighter than the rest. It crossed an otherwise ancient seam. Was this just a repair? Or had someone opened and resealed something long ago? Questions rose. Who had the skills to hide rooms so well? Would a stonemason working for the priests know what he was sealing away? One block sat slightly out of line. Its face bore no chisel date. No quarry mark. Was it lifted from another building and placed here to cover something valuable? Even more curious were vents. Small slits near the floor, capped with stones, but oddly shaped. Some believed they were part of ancient air systems. Others thought they were simple drainage. But in the middle of a sealed room, why would one need airflow? What if it was for preservation, or as a mark for those who knew where to look? Throughout the cellar levels, these strange details grew. A groove in the floor led nowhere. A step seemed worn, though it led to a wall. One expert mapped the mortar joints and found a perfect rectangle behind one chamber's western wall. When he tapped it, the center gave a dull thud, while the edges rang crisp and clear. Behind that wall, was there a space, unseen, untouched, and undisturbed? Could it be where texts fled during the burning years? Some maps from early Arabic visitors marked sealed chambers beneath ruined wings. What were they referring to? Did they glimpse what we now rediscovered? Or were these merely ghost stories passed down to guard secrets? As light faded through narrow grates above, the team marked every difference in color, sound, and stone. The past, it seemed, had not vanished. It had simply been covered by a careful hand, then passed off as age and decay. The question now was, how deep did the sealed story go? And could we open it without losing the clues left behind? Somewhere in the mortar, in the mismatched stones, and in the faint ring of a hollow step, history whispered back, waiting for someone to listen. Beneath the dusty layers of forgotten cellars and sealed stone halls, the mystery of Alexandria's hidden records narrowed to a specific detail. How were the texts stored? And how were they marked? In ancient Egypt, chests made of cedar or local acacia were often bound with bronze or iron for security. These were not simple boxes. Some had compartments lined with linen or papyrus padding, used to protect delicate scrolls and tablets. The hinges were forged strong enough to last centuries. Handles were carved to lift heavy loads quickly in emergencies, like fire or invasion. But most telling were the seals. Wax seals bearing the signs of libraries, temples, or royal houses closed each chest. These seals were symbols of authority. Break one without permission, and you could face severe punishment. At nearby dig sites, archaeologists had recovered broken seal fragments, some round, others square, each bearing an emblem. One showed a stylized ibis, long thought to be linked to Thoth, the god of writing. Another bore a lion atop an open scroll, found not far from where the Serapeum once stood. Most intriguing were impressions pressed with ring stamps. Library staff, royal scribes, and temple priests were often issued rings, engraved with unique marks. These were their signatures, used to close chests, certify scrolls, or log access to sacred rooms. A few unearthed examples matched records from Ptolemaic payrolls, confirming they came from state scribes. If such a ring sealed a chest packed with sensitive texts, the link between official staff and hidden scrolls became stronger. We asked, were these the same rings worn during the evacuations of the Great Fire? Could a chest sealed with one of these marks still lie under the old floors? One Roman source mentioned 6 iron-bound crates pulled from a burning warehouse by scribes and hauled toward the Serapeum. Later Arabic accounts told of locked trunks hidden beneath a ruined wing, too heavy to move without 6 men. Were these the same? And if so, what might they still hold? The seals provided one more clue. Some bore double impressions, 2 rings pressed side by side. This meant a second authority confirmed the contents. These double seals were rare and likely marked the most sensitive records. Did they protect stories of the sky beings? Or data too old and strange for the public eye? In a sealed world ruled by both kings and priests, who had the power to approve such double-sealed chests? Was it a librarian, a high priest, or a royal astronomer with access to Anunnaki charts? The wax, the iron, the ring, they were more than security. They were part of a system designed to move knowledge across danger and time. And if even one such chest survived the centuries sealed, unopened, and untouched beneath the fallen city, it might hold the clearest voice from the ancient world still waiting to speak. In the dusty remains of administration rooms once tied to Alexandria's scholarly elite, investigators found fragments of daily life, records of staff wages, food allowances, rent rolls, and housing lists. These lists were routine and carefully updated, showing who worked where, who lived in which compound, and which scribes were assigned to which halls. But in several cases, these records stopped suddenly. In the middle of what would have been a working year, the updates ended. No dismissal notes, no change of posts, just silence. The pattern was not limited to one building. It appeared across several logs from Alexandria's temple quarters and adjoining estates. Pay lines ended before the year's end. Rent collections stopped mid-season. Some scholars assumed the gaps were caused by fire or war, but further comparison revealed something unusual. Names that vanished from one list reappeared weeks or months later, sometimes at distant sites. One scribe, known for copying star charts in the palace library, was later listed as a junior at a remote monastic library far to the south. Another guard, once posted at the Serapeum's lower wing, appeared again at a temple estate closer to the desert. What event triggered the change? Was there a forced evacuation, or was this a silent, planned move? The records suggested coordination. The stops happened close together, not randomly. Could the sudden silence in the documents mark the moment when crates of sensitive texts were quietly moved out of the city? And if so, who gave the order? The rent rolls showed that entire staff, blocks, cooks, scribes, seal bearers, stopped receiving support at the same time. If these workers left, where did they go? And were they moving people or protecting something else? Many researchers had overlooked the staff logs, seeing them as dry bureaucracy, but tucked between them were notations that suggested something deeper. One page, brittle with age, bore a single word at the bottom: transferred. But it did not say where or why. Was this a clue to a deeper shift in library operations? Could this sudden drop in record-keeping mean that some scrolls were hidden rather than lost? The sites where the names reappeared were not random. Several were near old Coptic churches, others near early Arabic centers of learning. This raised questions. Did these staff members carry copies with them? Were the originals too important to leave behind? Or had they received orders to guard something too dangerous to be seen by future rulers? The pattern of movement hinted at pre-planned relocation, not chaos. So why do most official histories fail to mention these shifts? Is it possible that the last guardians of certain Anunnaki texts vanished into remote roles under new names, tasked not with reading, but with waiting? If knowledge was too precious to destroy, maybe it was stored in human memory, passed from staff to staff, until the time was right. And could one of those names, reappearing years later in a different place, still lead us back to where the true vault lies buried beneath our feet? Across the sacred grounds of ancient Egypt, hidden beneath colonnades and behind stone altars, were the temple crypts, sealed rooms, reserved not for public ceremony, but for the gods' most secret offerings. These narrow chambers, often accessible only to high priests, were carved deep into the temple's body, lined with stone slabs and cool to the touch. Within them, priests stored cult statues, ceremonial tools, and objects deemed too sacred for daily view. But some of these chambers defied standard purpose. Their length and shape, matched with drain holes and thick sidewalls, hinted at another use: storage of delicate, valuable items, needing protection from moisture and theft. Chests found in similar sites elsewhere were the right size for scroll bundles. Their iron hinges, still marked by time, mirrored those used in libraries. Could these rooms have sheltered scrolls not meant for common eyes? In several temples, faded wall carvings and crypt logs listed sky gift records and sun cycle instructions, terms unknown in most priestly rites. Were these coded names for celestial maps or older teachings, perhaps derived from texts now lost? What if the temple crypts, long assumed to hold only ritual tools, were also final shelters for chosen scrolls pulled from Alexandria during times of danger? A scribe fleeing a burning hall, or a priest under royal orders, could easily have passed sealed chests to trusted temple staff, and the temples, guarded day and night, offered safety no civic building could match. Some chambers bore traces of locks that had been sealed not with wax, but with clay. An older method, common to Mesopotamia. Why use such a seal unless the contents came from a place where cuneiform once reigned? Could the scrolls inside have described gods and rulers foreign to Egypt but familiar to the priestly mind? The temple crypts were dry, stable, and thick-walled, perfect for preserving fragile papyrus or clay tablets. But access required both rank and oath. In one dig near Dendera, archaeologists found a room filled with reused stone, its floor unusually raised. Beneath it, a sealed void had once held wooden remains, now gone. Had it stored the last of a forbidden record? And why had the room's inscriptions been chipped away in a precise rectangle, as if the wall once carried a title too dangerous to leave exposed? Could a priesthood, sworn to protect divine truth, have hidden records that linked Egypt's gods with beings from older lands, beings the Greeks would call the Anunnaki? If the scrolls named visitors from the sky, or mapped cycles tied to forgotten planets, would temple leaders have shared that with Rome? Or would they have buried the knowledge beneath their own feet, inside the only rooms the world could never raid? In a world where temples held more than faith, where they were vaults, observatories, and record halls in stone, might we still find, sealed behind untouched lintels, the last written whispers of a time when sky beings walked among men, when danger threatened Alexandria's vast halls? The safest route out was not by land, but by water. The Nile Delta stretched northward in winding veins, offering hidden pathways for those carrying precious cargo. From the city's eastern harbors, covered boats slipped into canals under moonlight, their wooden hulls weighted not with grain, but with crates sealed tight and packed with scrolls. These boats, small enough to go unnoticed, could reach the Delta estates in just a few days, depending on the current and the tides. Records show a class of riverboats called thynia, low-sitting vessels used by scholars and clerks. Their decks were covered in rush mats, their sides painted with protective signs. Who chose these vessels for secret transport? In the papyrus contracts stored at Oxyrhynchus, fragments mention river permissions given to private scholars during times of unrest. Some of these scholars, funded by noble patrons, owned retreats deep in the delta, surrounded by marshland and far from public roads. One such estate, near Sais, had a private dock, its access hidden by reeds. Could this have been a handoff point for boxes that never returned to the capital? We know, from scattered letters, that certain families protected sky knowledge tablets and star maps older than the flood. Were these coded phrases for texts linked to Anunnaki myths? If scrolls spoke of beings from the heavens, gods who shaped rivers, stars, and kings, then Delta estates, guarded by family oaths and hard to reach, offered the best sanctuary. These retreats, often former temple lands, had storerooms carved from mud brick, some with stone bases, to resist floods. In one site near Tanis, a cellar held remnants of lead wrappings and burnt papyrus, untouched for centuries. Why lead, unless to shield something from decay or prying eyes? And who sent the order to wrap, seal, and burn before retreating? Not all transports were permanent. Some crates moved seasonally, timed with the river's flood and retreat. And not all boats returned empty. They brought back honey jars, wine, or wrapped scrolls, some written in foreign hands. Could those scrolls be copies of copies, disguised in plain trade? The Nile was more than a river. It was a secret road, wide and winding, lined with reeds that muffled oars. Along its banks stood loyal homes, private estates of the few who knew what was once stored in Alexandria's deepest vaults. If chests bearing the seal of the royal scribe left by night, and if they passed through waters that knew no borders, then where did they finally rest? Do the silted edges of the delta still hide stone doorways beneath villa ruins? Could those ruins, long assumed to be mere storehouses or shrines, be the last resting place of scrolls that tell not of gods, but of teachers from the stars, voices that once echoed through the halls of Alexandria, now whispering through the reeds of the Nile? In a quiet corner of a Paris archive, buried in a Syriac codex translated during the 9th century, a single margin note changed the direction of every scholar who saw it. Written in faded brown ink, the note cited a source long believed to be lost. Asterisk. The words of the sky teachers, asterisk. The translator, unnamed but meticulous, had been copying an astronomical treatise when he paused to reference this mysterious work. The handwriting was careful, different from the main scribes, suggesting either an overseer's comment or a deliberate insertion. Using ink analysis, researchers dated the margin note to around the same time the manuscript was copied, likely in northern Mesopotamia. But the source it mentioned, the Times Sky Teachers, Times text, does not exist in any catalog. What was this forgotten work that spoke of beings who taught the stars and winds? Was it a code for something much older? Some believe it could be one of the vanished Alexandria scrolls, smuggled east in the centuries following the library's decline. If so, it might have been copied again and again, each time losing its name and author, until only whispers remained in side notes like this. The term sky teachers appears in Mesopotamian myth, often linked with the Anunnaki, figures said to descend from the heavens with knowledge no human had. Could this lost source have connected those ancient beings with the structured astronomy of Alexandria? More intriguing still, the note used phrasing common in Ptolemaic-era Greek, not Syriac, raising questions about where the translator had read the work. Some suggest it was a Greek to Syriac bridge text, one of many copied by scholars in Edessa or Haran. But if the original lay in Alexandria, how did it travel so far? And who preserved it during centuries of unrest? One theory claims the source belonged to a hidden stock removed from the library before its worst losses, packed with other sky charts and natural lore, then passed from hand to hand in secret. Would a translator in Mesopotamia have been aware of this heritage? Why did he choose to cite it, even briefly, in a scientific treatise? If the scrolls spoke of those who taught the old kings and measured time before time began, were they describing beings from the stars? In the same codex, Another note warns against errors brought by prideful spirits, hinting at controversy around the knowledge itself. Could such warnings explain why the words of the sky teacher's times vanished? The ink still clings to parchment like a whisper, a single voice echoing across time. One marginal note, one name lost in smoke, may be all that remains of a scroll once guarded under Alexandria's floors. It calls now from a distant shelf, daring us to ask what else was copied, hidden, or remembered when fire met paper and silence followed. Across continents and centuries, myths arose of beings who arrived not to conquer, but to teach. From the wise Viracocha of the Andes to the radiant Apkallu of Mesopotamia, cultures recorded tales of lawgivers who came from afar bearing knowledge of stars, farming, speech, and justice. What's striking is how often these figures arrived after a great flood, walked with kings, or vanished into the sky. In Egypt, Thoth was said to have penned the earliest laws. In Greece, Prometheus gave fire and wisdom, then paid a heavy price. In India, Manu survived a deluge to rebuild society with sacred rules. Are these coincidences? Or do they point to something older, perhaps rooted in one archive, one lost trove of origin stories? When myths are placed side by side, shared details leap out. Beings from above, knowledge of time, the teaching of calendars, and the instruction of rulers. Many use the symbol of tablets or scrolls, often delivered in secluded places or hidden from the unworthy. Could these overlapping legends stem from a hidden core of texts once housed in Alexandria? If a sealed chamber beneath the library held such a collection, and if parts of it were copied or remembered elsewhere, how many later myths drew unknowingly from that well? The Syrian accounts of angelic watchers who fell for teaching secrets echo the Sumerian warnings about the Anunnaki's divided goals. The Dogon of Mali describe visitors from Sirius with exact astronomical details, while Hopi stories speak of people led underground by guardians of wisdom. Might all these be cultural memories shaped by one central scriptural stream, spreading from a library floor to the mountains of Peru and the deserts of Utah? Some historians dismiss these echoes as pattern-seeking, but others see fingerprints of a lost archive, one that carried accounts of skyborn mentors scattered through priesthoods, caravans, and conquests. Why do so many of these lawgivers come bearing symbols, staffs, tablets, or shining garments? Why do they so often depart after teaching, promising to return? If scrolls from Alexandria hinted at the Anunnaki not as gods, but as skilled beings once tied to Earth's ancient past, then fragments of that story may have slipped into religious tales and heroic epics over time. Could a single group of texts, guarded, translated, or even half-remembered, have seeded myths across the globe? And if so, what did the original source truly describe? Was it history, theology, or something in between? These stories endure not just because they explain the past, but because they whisper of a lost beginning. The echoes still linger, in chants, in carvings, in the old stories told beneath stars. Perhaps they began in a vault of dry cedar and wax-sealed chests, where one scroll told of beings who gave the first laws to the first cities, and whose legacy, scattered by fire and time, still pulses through our oldest legends. In quiet corners of Alexandria's scriptoriums, certain tables lay tucked inside worn scrolls, columns of star names, numbers, and shifting cycles unlike anything in common use at the time. These were not Greek in origin. Some listed lunar periods that spanned over thousands of days, matching the odd yet precise Saros cycle known in Babylonian astronomy. Others traced the positions of planets across spans that made no sense for local weather or farming. What purpose did such vast timelines serve? The calculations bore signs of Mesopotamian roots, including base 60 notations and formulae found in older cuneiform tablets. But how did these patterns arrive in Alexandria? Some scribes spoke of foreign math schools in Memphis and Thebes, where scholars trained in decoding what they called sky codes. These schools may have welcomed those who had once worked in Babylon's ziggurats, or even descendants of Anunnaki cults who tracked celestial alignments not for seasons, but for returns. Why did some of the tables repeat in intervals of 3,600 years? A cycle foreign to Egyptian and Greek practice. And why were certain star clusters marked with symbols found in Akkadian myths? Could these records preserve knowledge passed down by those who claim to have come from the stars themselves? In the Temple of Esna, inscriptions showed a being teaching the stars to humans. Could similar figures have introduced these long count calendars, later preserved in royal libraries? Scrolls tied to court astrologers often carried marginalia in older scripts, half effaced by time, yet echoing terms from Anu's star list, a Mesopotamian register said to separate divine and non-divine constellations. Could the scribes of Alexandria, trained in Greek and Egyptian thought, have tried to decode these strange charts without fully grasping their origin? Some may have copied them faithfully, not daring to question their purpose. Others may have hidden them, knowing that they hinted at non-human authorship. Might one or more of these scrolls have originated in the sealed vaults of Alexandria's restricted collections? What if such a table was not just mathematical, but a calendar tied to return dates, predicting not seasons but visitations? Historians tend to dismiss such questions, but the patterns remain, carved in ink and geometry. If these tables traveled from Babylon to Alexandria, and if their math traces back even further to teachers who once walked the Fertile Crescent, then perhaps the library did more than store human wisdom. It preserved a timekeeping system meant for watchers of the sky. When scholars later found fragments of these tables in Arabic manuscripts, they puzzled over their use. Were they astrological toys, or fragments of a clock tied to the stars themselves? What secrets lay hidden in the numbers that no longer matched any known tradition? Some say the answer waits not in the stars, but beneath a broken floor where dusty scrolls still rest, waiting to realign an ancient calendar with our present sky. Among the brittle scrolls that survived Alexandria's earlier days were those filled not with tales or maps, but with treatments, recipes for wounds, fevers, and afflictions now long forgotten. But what puzzled scholars wasn't just the ailments described. It was the measurements used. Units like the shekel of light or the finger breadth of life appeared repeatedly, defying standard Egyptian, Greek, or Roman metrics. When researchers traced these terms, they found close matches in tablets from Uruk and Lagash, ancient Mesopotamian cities where early medicine mixed ritual with reason. Some remedies matched Sumerian prescriptions almost word for word, including treatments for liver disease and eye infections. But how did those measures cross centuries and rivers to reach Alexandria? Could a master list of conversion standards have once bridged the knowledge of different lands? We found hints of such a list in a torn index, cataloging the equivalents of royal cubits, temple grains, and Babylonian time parts. Was this an effort to unify foreign medical texts into one usable archive? If so, who led it? Priests in Alexandria's healing temples may have consulted these rare scrolls, preserving units no longer in use but still trusted by their order. Some labels on jars found near the Serapeum crypts used the same symbols for dosage as found on Akkadian cylinder seals. What were those jars meant to hold? And why were their contents recorded in a language long dead in Egypt? Could it be that certain medical arts were seen as sacred, too powerful, or too dangerous to be freely shared? A physician's scroll from the Fayum region described a night transfer of herbal formulas sealed with wax, accompanied by guards and a senior scribe. Why such secrecy for medicine? Unless the treatments relied on knowledge believed to come from non-human sources. Ancient Sumerian myths tell of gods who taught humans how to heal and measure, especially the Anunnaki Enki, said to pass down medical wisdom. Could fragments of this god's teachings have survived in Alexandria, shielded behind obscure terms and locked behind archaic units? Scholars wonder if the hidden vault beneath the great library once held a unified reference, a tablet or scroll that translated lost measures into usable knowledge. If such a text existed, it would have been priceless, especially for those trying to adapt old remedies for new hands. Why else would so many copies attempt to preserve both the recipe and the scale? And what happened to those originals? Were they destroyed, hoarded, or quietly absorbed into later Arabic medicine under new names? The legacy of those units lingers, scattered across old charts and forgotten jars. Yet their origin, and the logic behind them, suggests a network of healing knowledge that stretched across empires. Who first set those standards? And if they were not human, whose hand carved the master measures? Somewhere, perhaps buried beneath crushed stone and sealed floors, that master list waits, inked by scribes who served not just kings, but the memory of gods who once walked the earth. In the closing years of the 3rd century, long after the fires had dimmed and the main halls of the great library fell silent, a teacher from the East arrived at Alexandria's gates. His name was recorded in Greek letters as Aran-Mu, though whispers among scribes said his true name bore roots older than the Tigris. He traveled with 3 sealed trunks and a letter of welcome from a known scholar priest who once studied in Antioch. Aran-Mu spoke several tongues and could read star charts without reference. He taught select students late at night, behind closed doors, often starting his lessons with a prayer not to the Egyptian gods, but to the first watchers. His teachings combined geometry, medicine, and star lore. But what intrigued those who observed him was not just what he taught, but what he refused to copy. When a royal copyist offered to duplicate one of his older tablets, Aran-Mu declined, citing sacred oaths. He explained that some texts were not to be spoken or inked outside their original shrine. He carried one scroll wrapped in black cloth, opened only at solstices, and only in solitude. His students asked what was in it, and Aran-Mu would only say, "It is not mine to give. Why would a learned man, trained in the highest arts of Mesopotamian and Persian knowledge, guard a scroll so closely in a city famed for copying?" Records show he spent time within the underground rooms of the Serapeum, not cataloging, but watching. A temple log marked his visits with red ink, a sign normally used for high priests or envoys. Who gave him this access? A letter from a Roman official warned that some of Aran-Mu's teachings bordered on forbidden lore, especially his talk of beings who ruled before the flood. Why would Roman ears grow anxious at a teacher speaking of skyborn lawgivers? And who shielded Aran-Mu from expulsion? One parchment found in a Coptic archive described a pact between a noble house and a guest from the East who was not to be disturbed. Could a powerful patron have protected him in exchange for private instruction? Or was Aran-Mu serving a greater tradition, one where not all knowledge was meant for kings or crowds? When he left Alexandria years later, he sailed south, not homeward. His trunks were sealed again, and no copy remained of his scrolls, but a faint scribal note, tucked in the margin of a student's chart, reads, "Mu says the gods came on lines of fire and taught the seed makers." Was this the first hint of a preserved Anunnaki record? And if so, was Aran-Mu its final keeper in the West? What truths did he choose not to share? And who still keeps his silence today? The vaults may be dry and the halls bare, but perhaps, somewhere in the sand or stone, the teacher's guarded truths still wait, hidden like the stars he studied every night. Alexandria's harbors once echoed with the sounds of rope and timber, the creaking of masts, and voices in dozens of tongues. It stood not just as a center of learning, but as a vital crossroads of trade, where Africa, Asia, and Europe converged. Roman galleys docked beside Phoenician traders, while Nubian rafts and Indian vessels unloaded silks, spices, scrolls, and strange relics. Among their cargoes came amphorae, textiles, and papyrus bales, but also wooden crates, iron-bound and sealed with wax or pitch. Some bore simple merchant marks, while others held no mark at all. Harbor manifests reveal that certain shipments arrived in the dead of night, logged quietly by scribes known only by initials. Why were these entries shorter, vaguer, and marked with faded ink? In some cases, shipments listed as oil or honey weighed too much for their type. A crate labeled figs was once opened in error. Inside was a set of scrolls, wrapped in oiled cloth. The port officer who reported it disappeared soon after. Who moved such crates? And why would scrolls be smuggled this way? There are whispers of a quiet network, a loose alliance of traders, scribes, and loyal scholars, who ferried knowledge across sea routes under the noses of governors and generals. Some used secret compartments under grain sacks or beneath ivory slabs. Could these have been the final protectors of vanished scrolls from the Great Library? A carved seal found in an old dock house matched one used by a librarian in the Serapeum, decades before its destruction. Was this evidence of a coordinated effort to spread endangered knowledge? An old Greek traveler's log spoke of a merchant of Tyre who dealt in memories, delivering boxes of stars and names older than Egypt. What were these boxes, and what memories did they hold? In Alexandria's warehouse ledgers, certain traders appear repeatedly, often during periods of unrest. Their roots reached as far as Rhodes, Carthage, and even the ports of southern Anatolia. Were they just clever businessmen, or trusted couriers of ancient truth? Some scholars believe the Anunnaki records, or stories tied to them, were carried this way, hidden in spice crates, shared in whispers, or sold only to those who knew the right phrase. Why would anyone risk so much for these scrolls, unless what they held could challenge the order of kings and priests alike? Alexandria was more than a market for goods. It was a crossroads for memory, a place where parchment and prophecy moved silently beneath the sails. As we trace these trade routes, we must ask, which hands passed down the true story of sky beings? And are there still scrolls resting in the dark corners of old port cities, waiting for the world to remember the roads they once sailed? In the dim corners of Alexandria's archival history, clues still whisper through ink and numbering. While official lists of scrolls gave titles and subjects, some shelf marks defied expectation. A scroll on medicine might carry a mark meant for navigation. A history volume bore the sigil of a temple cult. These mismatches weren't errors, they were codes. We examined catalogs copied centuries later, and within them, matched pairs began to emerge. One scroll might be labeled A11 East, while its duplicate, or perhaps commentary, was tagged A11Z. Yet no known room used that suffix. What, then, was Z? Scholars puzzled over it for generations. Some believed it was a forgotten hall, but others proposed a deeper idea. That Z referred to off-site storage, a cache outside the walls of the Serapeum and library proper. One dusty index found in an Anatolian monastery referred to A11Z, boxed, sealed, East Delta. Could that line have mapped a shipment to safety during Alexandria's many uprisings? These hidden index pairs were not random. We discovered that codes with odd suffixes clustered around certain topics: astronomy, flood lore, ancient rulers from the East, and what scribes called sky epics. These texts were always close to the tales of the Anunnaki. Could the off-site codes point to where these more sensitive scrolls were hidden? One shelf code, copied in the margin of a Coptic fragment, matched a crate inventory found carved into limestone at a desert storehouse. The numbers aligned, the weight was correct, and among the crates listed, stars, names, rivers. 12. What was this cryptic label referencing? 12 names of star beings? 12 rivers on an old world map? Why, we must ask. Did some scrolls get 2 marks, one for public eyes, one for those with deeper clearance? Did the staff fear that certain texts would bring too many questions, or worse, political danger? There's growing belief among a circle of researchers that the full catalog of Alexandria may never have been destroyed, only fractured, its secret keys scattered in distant places, encoded in forgotten pairs. And if those pairs could be matched again, would they lead us to the final vault? If so, who left the trail? Was it a final act of preservation by the last keepers? A copyist's quiet rebellion? Or perhaps something more coordinated? A map left behind for the right eyes in a future age? As we piece these codes together, line by faded line, we are left with a question both simple and vast. Did the truth about the Anunnaki and the world before the flood ever leave Alexandria's walls at all? Or did it simply move just far enough, waiting for someone to decode its hiding place? Through yellowed legal scrolls and estate records preserved in remote Coptic monasteries, we traced the lineage of a family whose name appeared in Alexandria's rolls for centuries. They were not famous. No statues bore their image. But across dynasties, their job remained constant. They served as caretakers of the royal collections. One name stood out. Parmenes, recorded as a chief scribe during the final years of the Serapeum. What made his record unique was not his salary, nor his assigned rooms, but a will, penned in a careful hand, passed down to his grandson. Within that will, amidst mentions of farmland and family relics, was a quiet line. Let the sealed goods be kept safe, as instructed, until such a time as signs return. No further detail was given. Yet sealed goods, in Alexandrian inventory terms, meant scroll crates, likely bound with wax and rope, often marked for royal eyes only. This raised questions. What did Parmenes hide? And what signs did he expect to return? We followed the executor of the will, a man named Aseth, who did not stay in Alexandria. Aseth's name next appears in an archive in Middle Egypt, linked to a temple estate near the edge of the Fayum. A rental agreement from the same period lists 2 trunks, non-cloth, sealed, stored in a rear hall on behalf of a client of the Delta. Was this the end of the trail, or the beginning of another? The trunks were never claimed. When the estate changed hands a generation later, the record simply noted old containers removed to cellars. By that point, no one remembered Parmenes or his warning. Strangely, among the goods left behind was a wooden chest lid, marked with a cartouche of the Ptolemaic library. It had been turned upside down and reused as a step. We showed it to modern scholars who confirmed the sign was genuine, rare, and seen only in a few museum fragments. Was this the seal of the missing stock? And more curiously, if a family had passed down these items for generations, why did they never sell or destroy them? Could it be that they feared breaking a promise made under priestly oath? Was Aseth waiting for something? Or someone? Theories circle quietly in academic corners that the last custodians may have known more than they ever wrote down, that the real vault was not meant to be opened by them, but preserved for a later world, more prepared for what lay inside. Could the sealed goods include sky charts, ancient star maps, or even the earliest scrolls about the Anunnaki? Were they hidden not for safety, but for timing? The last custodian vanished from records 2 years after his move inland. His estate remained unclaimed, and deep beneath layers of earth, a cellar still waits, perhaps holding more than history. It may hold the final memory of a library once called the Light of the World. Beneath the bustling city of modern Alexandria lies a maze of forgotten spaces. Cisterns, tunnels, vaulted chambers once used to move water, goods, and sometimes secrets. Using old municipal blueprints and accounts from French and Egyptian engineers of the 19th century, we began to remap the underworld beneath the ancient quarter, once dominated by the Royal Library. Some tunnels had long since collapsed, but others remained, blocked only by stonework or buried beneath newer foundations. Their courses curved in ways that matched no known waterlines. One path, in particular, ran beneath the old palace compound and aligned closely with descriptions of the library's eastern wing. Was this coincidence? Or did ancient planners design access below ground for reasons beyond water? We compared this with older Roman and Coptic texts that spoke vaguely of the scroll path, a corridor used in emergencies to move items unseen. Several dry cisterns also stood directly below blocks once part of the royal quarter, their positions now obscured by centuries of rubble. One such cistern featured a flat stone extension, a sort of blind passage no more than 5 cubits deep, too short for water flow, yet wide enough to hold a crate or two. We wondered, could this be the kind of chamber built not for plumbing, but for concealment? A short side room, easily sealed, unnoticed by those who didn't know to knock. Today, Alexandria's urban sprawl covers most of these sites, but some can still be accessed through church basements, bathhouse ruins, and catacomb entries. Using thermal imaging and microgravity scans, modern surveys have detected cavities with right angles and smooth walls, features not found in natural voids. One scan revealed a rectangular hollow just 3 feet beneath a now cracked marble plaza, directly above the root of one known library corridor. Could this be a hidden side room, built with just enough space to hold sealed chests? And if so, who would have used it, and when? Some believe these vaults were added during the later Ptolemaic years, when threats from both Rome and civil unrest grew. Others suggest they date even earlier, used by priests when temple libraries faced desecration. The theory grows stronger when we consider how few scrolls survived compared to the vast numbers once recorded. Where did they all go? Is it possible that some never left Alexandria at all, but simply moved down and over, into stone cavities designed to hold them for centuries? If such a cache still lies hidden beneath the city's feet, then its discovery would not only rewrite what we know of ancient knowledge, but perhaps reveal the forbidden texts that sparked entire legends, the ones about sky teachers, strange calendars, and visitors from the stars. Are we walking above the very rooms that once held them? The clues, in the stone, whisper that we might be. In a time of rising tension, when flames or foreign boots could erase centuries of knowledge in a single day, the quiet removal of scrolls was an act of both desperation and foresight. The operation had to be swift, silent, and unrecorded. It began under cover of night, when public streets emptied and the moon hung low behind clouds. A small team of trusted men, often librarians, scribes, and guards bound by oath, assembled with tools prepared in advance. Wax-sealed chests, reinforced with iron bands, were carried one by one from hidden subfloors or secured rooms. Each crate had to be light enough for 2 men to lift, yet dense with scrolls, clay tablets, or copper-wrapped parchments. To muffle sounds, The men wrapped the chest handles with cloth and lined their sandals with wool. No metal clasps clinked, no doors slammed. The team avoided main corridors, instead using temple paths, servant tunnels, or water access routes to reach waiting carts or river boats. Cover stories were simple: routine transfers for preservation or deliveries of religious supplies. One forged permit could justify the movement. No royal signature was needed, only the seal of a mid-level overseer who asked no questions. If the group moved through a temple, priests often turned a blind eye, understanding the stakes. Some scrolls bore marks of high secrecy, indicating content restricted to the royal court or elite astronomers. By morning, the crates were gone, stored in crypts, estates, or small libraries miles away. No logbook recorded them. Even the wax seals could be swapped later, bearing false dates or different institutions. A day later, when fires reached the gates or soldiers ransacked the halls, nothing but empty shelves and harmless texts remained. Was this how some Anunnaki scrolls slipped away unnoticed? The theory grows when we consider chests found in later monasteries or desert caches that did not match local script traditions. Someone knew how to pack them, how to erase their trail. The operation required not just planning, but loyalty and silence. One broken vow could doom them all. Yet over centuries, few accounts tell of betrayal. Instead, there are whispers of scrolls read in private chambers, of diagrams copied from unseen originals, of teachers who spoke of skylords with knowledge not found in public books. Could this be the legacy of a single night's work? Or many nights across years? As the threat grew, the silence that followed was not forgetfulness, but protection. Even today, no official record confirms the removal. But the gaps in scroll lists, the sudden ends to catalog entries, and the appearance of foreign hands in distant copies all hint that something did move, quietly, purposefully, and without leaving a single line in the logbooks. Somewhere in a quiet Syriac manuscript copied centuries after Alexandria's fall, a single line endures. From the ones who came from the sky, the law was spoken in 7 tongues. The phrase appears in a theological debate, not as fact, but quoted from an earlier, unnamed source. Yet its weight lingers. That line, written in flowing Estrangelo script, was a translation of a Greek text that had itself echoed a fragment from an older Aramaic scroll. Each time it crossed a language, the meaning shifted slightly, but the core remained. Sky beings, law, tongues. Such elements do not belong to the typical scriptural canon. So who wrote the original? And why did it vanish, while this lone sentence survived in the margin of a later work? Scholars tracing the quotation found that the earliest record surfaced in Edessa, then moved into a monastic scriptorium in Haran. From there, it was recopied into Arabic centuries later, where a polymath hinted at its origin, but avoided naming it directly. He referred only to wisdom drawn from before Babel. This path, Aramaic, to Greek, to Syriac, to Arabic, is not the usual route of myth. It is the trail of protected knowledge. And it begs the question, what did the full source contain? If a single line remembered sky beings teaching law in 7 tongues, what might the rest of the scroll have described? Their names? Their descent? The form of the laws? The line feels like the echo of a greater declaration, perhaps once known to legal scholars and priest astronomers in Alexandria. The structure of the quote suggests a formal introduction, as if it belonged to a charter or proclamation. Some believe the original text lay among the sealed chests moved during the city's darkest nights. Others suspect it remained in a temple vault, its fragments later retrieved by scribes who feared its implications. Why did it not survive in full? Perhaps the line was too bold, too alien. A document linking divine law to beings from the sky might have threatened both imperial authority and religious orthodoxy, so it was silenced or hidden. But the survival of even one sentence, drifting across languages and borders, tells us that someone believed it mattered. Someone copied it. Not once, but several times, each time preserving its strange core. Was this line a memory of Anunnaki influence, real or mythologized? Or was it invented later, inspired by lingering temple traditions? The debate continues. But what remains clear is this. Somewhere, buried beneath layers of translation and time, there was once a fuller story. And this one surviving line, quoted with care in a text that never expected it to last, may be the thread that leads us back to the lost voice of the teachers from the sky. Not all scholars accept the link between the Anunnaki and Alexandria's lost texts. Some call it a modern myth, built on scattered facts. They argue that Mesopotamian deities were later copied into Greek myths, but not carried forward through secret vaults. They point to a lack of direct cuneiform in Alexandrian ruins. Others claim the scrolls mentioned do not exist outside of legend. One group says that similarities between myths across cultures are due to shared human themes, not shared texts. Another notes that sky beings appear in many stories worldwide, not just Mesopotamian or Egyptian. They call the idea of a hidden Anunnaki archive interesting but unsupported. These skeptics challenge the chain of transmission. They want clear, original sources, not summaries or retellings. They say that even if one sentence in Syriac points to sky teachers, it may have come from a story, not a record. They also point out that temple scribes may have reshaped earlier stories to fit their needs. Many argue that while Alexandria's library was grand, its mission was Greek knowledge, not Near Eastern preservation. They also ask, if a hidden vault existed, why have no scrolls surfaced? Why no names, no lists, no fragments? Some suggest wishful thinking drives the theory, hope that something wondrous lies beneath the ruins. Yet, even among critics, some admit the evidence is not fully closed. A few say that if one bilingual scroll were found, it could change the view. Others say a mention of Anunnaki names inside a Greek astronomical table would be enough to warrant a rethink. Some remain neutral. They say the story of Alexandria's vault is compelling, even if unproven. They warn against overreach, but support cautious exploration. One archaeologist wrote, "If such chests existed, they may yet lie beneath our feet, sealed not just in stone, but in silence." These debates are not new. Even in medieval times, Islamic and Christian scholars questioned the origin of strange wisdom texts. Were they divine, mythic, or ancient science? The same question remains today. What proof would be enough? A sealed chest with scrolls in 2 scripts. A scribe's note linking a myth to a real teacher. A second line, preserved in a different monastery. Until such evidence appears, the debate continues. Critics demand clarity. Believers ask patience. Between them lies the story. The idea that some knowledge, once feared or prized, was hidden on purpose. If that is true, time may still bring it forward. We outlined a full survey plan focused on 3 key areas once tied to the ancient library. First was the layered ground near the Serapeum's west wall. Second was an old storehouse now beneath a city museum. Third was a flagged courtyard where sinkholes had been noted. We chose these based on matching floor plans, old drainage routes, and preserved alignment. Our team worked with local permits and kept access respectful to nearby foundations. To avoid harming ancient walls, we selected non-invasive tools first. ground-penetrating radar would map buried voids. Microgravimetry would detect changes in soil density. If a signal was clear, a core sample could follow, taken from corners away from mosaics or stone seams. Each site would be mapped first by hand, then scanned during low visitor hours. We planned for 3 rounds: scan, review, then selective coring. Engineers built low-vibration mounts for equipment to reduce surface stress. In one zone, an older sewer line was marked to avoid disruption. We also consulted with local historians who warned of reused temple blocks underground. These blocks, once moved centuries ago, could mask vault outlines. Still, our priority remained safety, for the site and what might lie below. Each tool passed tests in nearby ruins. We took no shortcuts. Our core drills would stop at the first sign of impact. No full excavation was planned. This was a study of shapes, sounds, and small clues. If a void was found, a micro camera could be inserted. We prepared for dust, insects, and water seepage. We packed sterile bags and sealable tubes in case of old fibers or flakes. We also prepared to find nothing. Much could have collapsed or been cleared in centuries past. But if just one sealed pocket remained, it could change everything. A shelf, a chest, a scroll sealed in resin. That was the hope. We did not search for gold or tombs, only memory, waiting in stone. This was our map. This was the plan to lift one corner of the past. Initial scans revealed weak but clear gravity dips beneath 2 adjoining rooms near the ancient western perimeter. Though shallow, the anomalies matched the scale and depth of void-size models used in earlier temple and archive studies. These rooms, once part of a warehouse converted into stables, had long been dismissed as structurally unimportant. Yet, their subfloors held hints of something more. Moisture sensors showed dry zones shaped like capsules, sharply edged, with no signs of water flow. This dryness stood out, as the surrounding clay-rich soil held more dampness than expected. Together, the dry outlines and gravity drops suggested a sealed chamber beneath each room. A cavity, not collapse. We marked the signal edges and ruled out natural sink formations. The scans from 3 angles confirmed the same hollows, though one reading suggested denser fill in part of one void, possibly a stone box or covered shelving. The walls above were later additions, but older basalt blocks lined the base. We checked for drains, wells, or tunnels, but found none nearby. This silence around the space strengthened the idea that what lay below had been left untouched. Engineers reviewed the readings, comparing them with those from other ancient sealed rooms. The gravity curves had the slow dip and flat core typical of human-made voids. Not wide enough for crypts, too deep for root cellars, something else. Teams noted how mortar joints above the signal zone showed unusual cracking, as if time had stressed hidden edges. One technician tapped the floor and felt a faint echo from below. No resonance traveled far, but it was enough to mark. We placed monitoring tape and began plans for a small bore probe. Only sterile air would be blown inside. No suction, no cutting, just light and camera. The excitement grew quietly. These first readings were not proof, but they whispered of a space made with purpose. Could it be where chests had once been moved? Was this one of the quiet rooms built by those who knew the scrolls had to survive? The data alone could not answer, but it drew lines to follow. If the voids had air pockets, if dust layers were undisturbed, then what lay inside had waited through centuries without touch. And if that was true, what stories still waited in that silence? We drilled narrow cores from the edges of the suspected voids, staying clear of stress lines and key support stones. Each core, no wider than a coin, was pulled slowly, layer by layer. The outermost section showed normal fill, but then came a fine layer of compacted dust, pale gray and untouched. Beneath it, grit with bits of crushed lime and old mortar suggested human work. Then, the find that paused all hands. A single dark fiber, rough to the touch and thicker than papyrus. It was wound around a grain-like stem. Early checks showed it was not modern cloth. As we continued, another fiber appeared, this time pressed into a faint curve, possibly wrapping once around something soft. We found 2 specks of charcoal, too small to see without magnification. These were set aside for carbon dating. The dust layers themselves held tiny flecks of pollen, not today's, but ancient. Some from Nile reeds, others from imported trees like cedar. The mortar here was crumbled but distinct. Its makeup, unlike the upper walls. It had more shell, more quartz grit, matching recipes from the Ptolemaic era. Chemical tests confirmed old lime mixed with sea sand, no modern cement. We filtered the core's dust to catch fine threads. One was golden, almost metallic, yet soft. Possibly a thread from a seal ribbon or label tag. It was wrapped in soot, as if touched by smoke long ago. Microscopes revealed that the fiber had been twisted by hand, not spun by machine. We packed each layer in sterile trays, labeled by depth, and sealed them for lab review. Each tray was logged with temperature, pressure, and humidity at time of pull. We kept a clean zone, with filtered air, so no present-day particles could taint the samples. The small finds, fiber, dust, pollen, and grit, were sent for dating across 3 labs. If even one came back as older than late Roman, we'd know this space had not been touched for over 1,000 years. If older still, before the Arab period, we might be looking at something last opened when scrolls still lived in royal hands. The team spoke little, but the silence held weight. Each piece of packed grit told part of a story. Every flake, every thread, mattered. Was this vault made to guard something more than books? If the fibers came from a scroll wrap or a packing cloth once tied by a scribe's hand, then time had not erased all, it had only hidden. Now, with the samples safe, the next question pressed forward. What lay just beyond the reach of the drill? A wall, a box, or nothing but air, perfectly sealed. For 2,000 years, in a quiet lab lit by soft overhead lamps, the core samples from beneath the old Alexandrian floors were finally ready. Experts gently removed fibers, dust, and mineral grit embedded in layers once untouched for millennia. Carbon testing from the deepest sample returned a startling window. Late 1st century before the Common Era. That date fell within the decade following the first major fire that struck Alexandria, a blaze that began during Caesar's siege in the late 40s BCE. The fill that sealed the chamber, gritty mortar, limestone powder, and pulverized shell, was not part of the original floor design. It was added later, possibly in haste. Scientists noted a subtle compression difference between the lowest sediment and the top slab, a sign that something heavy had once rested in the void before being removed. Did someone open the chamber just after the fire, retrieve what mattered, then seal it again under cover of rebuilding? Scroll fragments from later copies spoke of a relocation under divine threat, a phrase vague enough to mean anything, yet ominous in tone. The tests also revealed burned plant ash mixed into the sealing mortar, matching with scorched records from the storage halls. Was this the ash of destroyed scrolls, or something used to disguise their true fate? A second layer showed reddish clay smudges with faint tool marks, suggesting workers shaped bricks or stamped chests nearby. Could these have been library staff working in secret, directed by a royal decree. In royal letters found elsewhere in Egypt, emergency measures were often passed without public notice. One fragment warned that wisdom kept alive may one day restore the world. Was this a cryptic reference to a hidden archive? The lab also flagged a rare trace of cedar resin. The wood was foreign, expensive, and often used to line ceremonial containers. This detail hinted at care, perhaps even reverence, in how certain objects were stored. Could it have been a scroll case, once polished and sealed, laid gently in a stone chamber before vanishing into legend? If the resin came from Lebanon, it suggested trade ties, but also perhaps a conscious choice to preserve something beyond value. All of this matched the timing and urgency of a desperate rescue. The chaos of war, fire, and regime change made such a window plausible. And if that was true, then the records weren't lost. They were moved, hidden, protected. But by whom, and for what purpose? Could the Anunnaki accounts have been part of what was removed before the ashes cooled? And if so, are we now standing at the edge of a story carefully buried, its clues left in layers no eye was meant to see again? In a weathered archive nestled in the hills of southern Italy, a parchment ledger was found, its ink browned by time, but still legible under careful light. It dated to the 9th century CE, long after Alexandria's fires had cooled and its stones settled into memory. Among lists of traded goods, one entry stood apart. It read, 3 crates, sealed in wax. Origin, Miser. Contents, not to be opened. Buyer, Sanctum Custodia. The word Miz was the Arabic name for Egypt. These crates, explicitly noted as sealed and untouchable, were purchased by a known religious order whose other records hinted at preservation, not commerce. Why would a monastery or secretive group pay for sealed crates, centuries after the Library of Alexandria had supposedly vanished in smoke? And why was there no mention of their contents? Only their country of origin and condition. Further down, another line echoed the first, dated 10 years later. Additional chest, cedar-lined, received in good faith. Transfer initiated from Antioch. That city, already known for housing earlier copies of Alexandrian texts, appeared again like a ghost in the paper trail. Could this be the path taken by rescued materials once hidden beneath the serapeum, or moved during the fire? The records showed payment in gold and spices, far more than the average rate for scholarly manuscripts. Clearly, these were no ordinary texts. A note in the margin mentioned, "Works not suited for general eyes," a phrase often used when religious or political tensions required silence. Was this a euphemism for something far older and more controversial? Within the same ledger was a short note by a scribe, perhaps commenting beyond his role. Crates, marked with the sign of the open eye. Key withheld. The open eye, was it a symbol of the sacred, or a mark left by scribes or guardians tied to the original vault? If a key was withheld, then the crates were not only sealed, they were meant to remain that way, perhaps for generations. Elsewhere, in a collection in northern Spain, a matching purchase appeared. This one included a sketched crate diagram and the note, "Recovered from Nile roots," were the lost scrolls scattered through a quiet, intentional diaspora. Traded hand to hand, hidden in abbeys and castles, waiting for safer times? Or was there a single orchestrated plan, a blueprint of movement long lost to fire and exile? The pattern of secrecy, the reluctance to list contents, and the steep costs all pointed to one truth. Someone valued the mystery more than the disclosure. Could these crates hold the missing Anunnaki records, once copied and hidden during Alexandria's darkest days? And if so, do they still lie sealed behind stone, under floorboards or in vaults of silent halls, their wax unbroken, their contents unread for over 1,000 years. After the fires and sackings that devastated Alexandria, one quiet question refused to fade. If sealed crates of scrolls survived, where did they go? Not all paths from the ruined library led to destruction. Some, chosen with care and precision, disappeared into silence. The Nile offered a natural exit from Alexandria. Its waters led south and east, reaching estates and religious settlements that sat far from urban eyes. Among them, the desert monasteries near Wadi el Natrun stood out, quiet, remote, and surrounded by dunes that swallowed sound. These early Coptic communities were known for their libraries, where scriptures and relics shared shelf space with banned texts. Their architecture included underground vaults and sealed chambers. Could a chest from Alexandria have been hidden among their locked archives, its contents untouched since the 4th century? Some records hinted so. Manuscripts from the 9th century describe gifts too sacred to open, wrapped in waxed skins and marked with signs only certain monks could read. Farther east, the trail twisted toward Syria. Edessa and Nisibis became known for their schools, where Greek, Syriac, and older Mesopotamian wisdom blended. The school of Edessa in particular held a chamber known as the Hall of Mirrors, said to store texts that were never copied. Within a surviving catalog from the 6th century was an entry titled Box from the South. Unread. No title, no author, just that one line and an age-stained seal that matched Alexandrian ink. Traders helped the journey along. Ships from the Delta met caravans headed into the Levant, often carrying religious cargo marked as sealed gifts. One travel manifest showed a route from the Nile to the Sinai, then across the desert to Damascus. A side note read, "Keep the trunks dry and cool. Do not question contents." In Mar Matai Monastery, a scribe in the 10th century described a crate that arrived in silence, with no sender. He wrote, "Within lies truth too old for tongues." The monks sealed it behind an iron door and declared it forbidden for all but the abbot. It was never opened. Other crates may have gone to private scholars. In Antioch, one letter tells of a metal chest from Egypt, guarded, unopened, its guardian silent. It was passed from teacher to teacher, each one refusing to read it aloud. The path of a sealed crate from Alexandria, possibly filled with tales of the Anunnaki, ancient star teachers, or laws from the first cities, did not end in flame. It may have ended in stone, in silence, in a locked room beneath a desert Sunday. Today, some of those rooms still stand. Some doors are still sealed. The paper may have faded, but the mystery remains sharp. Did those chests hold the scrolls that told the true story of the Anunnaki? And if so, what would happen if just one were opened now? From the fragments we pieced together, a pattern of subjects emerged. Law, stars, floods, and a race of teachers once called the Anunnaki. The fragments were small, sometimes only a few words long, but their topics repeated across languages. One fragment in Greek spoke of laws from the Watchers of the Sky, another in Coptic of rules taught before the rivers rose, and a Syriac note simply listed 12 names, 12 stars. These scraps hinted at a larger source, something that combined governance, astronomy, and myth into one framework. We reconstructed the probable content as carefully as we could, comparing wording with Mesopotamian tablets and early Egyptian star lists. The picture that formed was striking. It described a teacher race who taught flood timing, crop cycles, and justice codes to early rulers. Was this the Anunnaki's true story, a record of instruction rather than domination? The fragments also contained diagrams of star positions that did not match local constellations. Did these reflect ancient observations lost to modern charts, or symbolic maps of another meaning? Some scholars believed they were simply metaphors, but others argued the precision was too great. Why would metaphors need exact angles and cycles? If rulers had access to such texts, their decisions on building, harvest, and law would seem guided by knowledge far ahead of their time. Could this explain sudden leaps in irrigation, city planning, and standardized weights across empires? Another fragment described a great river beyond all lands that would rise when the cycles turn. Was this a poetic flood myth, or a memory of a real event, like the Younger Dryas, or some forgotten catastrophe? The texts did not say outright, but their tone suggested warning and preparation. We showed how such claims shaped rulers. Ptolemaic kings built temples, aligned to stars named in the fragments. Priests advised on ceremonies at dates matching the mysterious cycles. Even Hypatia's circle quoted sky teachers in private debates on ethics and natural law. Yet the fragments were always partial, as if the core story had been deliberately split. Was this done to protect it, or to keep its power limited to a chosen few? If the full texts still exist, sealed in a crate somewhere, they could reveal whether the Anunnaki were real teachers of law and science, or only myth layered upon myth. Either way, the fragments show how knowledge, true or legendary, shaped decisions at the highest levels. They remind us that what rulers believed about their past changed how they planned their future. And if those beliefs were based on texts hidden beneath Alexandria, what might still lie waiting to be read? From the cracked floors of Alexandria to distant monastic rooms in desert hills, the trail we followed revealed something deeper than just missing scrolls. It revealed a careful path of silence, sealed chests, vanished catalog entries, and whispers of a story too old and too powerful to vanish on its own. The fragments spoke of lawgivers from the sky, of cycles tracked by stars, of great floods, and of a race called the Anunnaki, who taught humans how to measure the world and govern it. Each piece alone was fragile, but together, they outlined a pattern that echoed through cultures and centuries. The clearest proof now sits in the small voids found beneath what remains of the ancient library, their shapes too regular to be natural, and their mortar too different from the floors around them. Samples pulled from those margins showed fibers not native to the region and fill dates aligned with moments of crisis. These are no longer just theories. They are testable signals, points on a map, waiting for a hand to open them. But what would it mean to find one sealed chest intact? What would it mean if inside lay a scroll untouched since the time of the Caesars, bearing marks that matched those whispered in Coptic, Syriac, and Akkadian? Could such a find truly rewrite our view of human beginnings? Would we see ourselves as guided by our own invention, or shaped from the start by other minds? And if the Anunnaki were more than myth, if their records lay stored beneath centuries of dust, what new questions would emerge about where we come from, and who first held the pen that taught us to write? The impact would stretch beyond history books. It would echo through science, religion, and culture. The idea that a single hidden room could change the course of human self-understanding is no longer fiction. It is a possibility supported by ground readings, paper trails, and the stubborn survival of knowledge across collapse after collapse. Some say this is wishful thinking. Others argue the signs are too many to ignore. But perhaps the real meaning is not only in what the texts might say, but in how far people once went to protect them. Through fire, war, and empire's fall, someone always carried the last copy. That alone says these records mattered. And now, as tools grow sharper and ruins more open, the final seal may be closer than ever to breaking. What if the true story of the Anunnaki And the real beginning of civilization is waiting in the dark, beneath a floor first laid 2,000 years ago.